again, welcome to the Penny Dreadfuls podcast, where we review books and you get to listen to us complain about them. I'm one of three hosts. My name is Sam,
I'm Izzy.
And I am Jackie.
and this is week three, or I guess book three, however we want to say that. So, this is a spoiler heavy podcast. So, if you've not read the book and you don't like spoilers, don't listen. If you don't care about spoilers, keep listening. This week, we're covering Under the Dome by Stephen King. It is a long, long book. According to Goodreads, it's 1,249 pages. It was released in November of 2009, and it's a science fiction horror genre. Is there anything you guys want to say before I get into my little synopsis?
I think science fiction is kind of tacky to add on there, especially because of some of the stuff that happened in the book. But I'll get into that later.
I don't even know if I would really call it horror.
I mean, it's a shitty situation. I would probably cry every day.
Okay, we'll talk about it at the end. Stay tuned.
I'm usually we do an overall question before we get into it, but I think considering what this book is, we should just dive into it because I know I'll have lots of comments after. So
This book seems to be very heavy on the you either love it or you hate it. But either way, you have lots of opinions. So
yes,
I think that's a good choice.
this whole 1,200-page book only covers 8 days. It starts on October 21st and it all wraps up October 28th. So as we go into this, remember all this happens in 8 days. The book starts, we're in a really small town in Maine. It's called Chester's Mill. People are going about their day, living their normal everyday lives, and then abruptly lots of very bad things happen. It doesn't go into it right away, but you find out eventually. This giant invisible barrier comes down. Within the first couple pages of the book, a plane runs into the barrier and the people in the plane die. I think it was a chipmunk gets cut in half. 8 cars slam into this thing and get murdered. A lot of people get injured, and all just before noon on one day. It kind of first starts going into the actual story following this guy named Dale Barbara, who goes by Barbie. He is on his way out of town after a little local dispute. As more cars show up, the police chief, I think his name was Howard, they call him Duke though. He comes up and he gets too close to the dome, as they call it. He's instantly murdered because his pacemaker explodes. So that was traumatizing. That then starts a chain of events where this other guy, Big Jim, becomes the head honcho and takes over. And I'll get into Big Jim later. I have a whole bunch of things to say about him, but he becomes the next big authority figure. He's lots of power play things. And then really one of the first things he does is appoint, I know his last name's Randolph, but I want to say it's Pete. I might be wrong.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
okay. He gets appointed to police chief. He starts appointing a bunch of other people, like his son to be a member of the police, and a bunch of teenagers become the new police force. By the end, there's 50 police officers, but that's a whole nother thing. That's another crazy thing. Before I go too far into that, Big Jim's son, Junior, there's another subplot with him where he is in the process of beating and strangling a girl to death when the barrier comes down. He ends up killing another girl in the process before he ends up being on the police force. So there's all the people that get killed by the dome, and then Junior kills 2 people pretty much right in the beginning of the book. So we get to see all this inside stuff happening where there's the shift with Big Jim coming into play and Barbie trying to do stuff, trying to figure out what to do next, where to go. And then we get to hear this other kind of outside look really the only outside perspective we get from Chester's Mill. We get Colonel Cox, who has a connection to Barbie. Barbie doesn't have a phone, so he ends up getting in contact with this lady named Julia. She's the editor of the newspaper, so she gets involved in all this because she now is the in-between between Cox and Barbie. After much back and forth, Barbie becomes the, I don't know if liaison's the word I want to use, but kind of like the one in charge. Cox appoints him as the government agent because of Barbie's army background, which I forgot to mention earlier, but he was out of the force, but by a presidential order, he gets reinstated and then goes up to the rank of colonel. So he now becomes this like opposing authority figure to Big Jim, and there's lots of tension and stuff between them. So like that's its own kind of storyline. All the stuff with Junior is like its own little storyline. At some point, you get to view the story through Brenda Perkins, who is Duke's widow, who I mentioned earlier, the old police chief. She's just hanging out in his office, just reminiscing and stuff, and accidentally bumps into his laptop. And she's like, I never go through his laptop, but it'd be nice to like kind of hear his voice one last time, you know? So she's like looking at his stuff and finds a file on the computer that has a whole bunch of information about Big Jim's wrongdoing, and like he's stealing money, and like he runs a meth lab, and now there's this underlying plot line too of them trying to take Big Jim down because Big Jim starts creating chaos basically and like panic. He decides to shut down the, I can't remember what it's called, the market that's there. They like shut that down, so then people have to do rationing, and a bunch of propane tanks go missing, so they're like having to ration that. So like a bunch of unnecessary panic just for as a power play. A bunch of people like Barbie, Julia, Brenda are all trying to like take him down kind of. Because they're trying to take him down, Big Jim frames Barbie for 4 murders. Barbie gets framed for Angie and Dodie, the 2 murders that Junior did. And then Reverend Lester Coggins, who used to launder money for Big Jim. Big Jim murders him to like silence him, but Barbie gets framed for that also. And Brenda Perkins, who I just mentioned, also gets murdered by Big Jim, and Barbie gets framed for that also. So that's just like another way of him trying to regain control, is to put Barbie in jail so that he can't take over, that kind of thing. With Cox's help and some other like outsider help, they start trying to figure out where this Geiger counter is. I think I'm saying that right.
Sure, sounds good.
But it's to try to figure out like where the source of the dome is coming from. They're trying to figure out if it's like an inside job or the military did it or extraterrestrials. But this Geiger counter is supposed to help figure that out. Eventually they figure out where that comes from, but I'll get back to that. Barbie does eventually get broken out of jail, and a bunch of other people die in that big breakout, including Junior. There's this other big event thing that's happening. It's a visitors day, so where people outside the dome can meet up at the edge of the people within the dome, so that loved ones could reunite sort of through the dome. So while all that's happening, Big Jim decides to send a bunch of police force out to where his meth lab is, and this guy, I think his real name is Phil, but they call him Chef. He's the one like currently running the meth lab. So they like try to take it from him because they need to like shut that down anyway, because they don't know when the dome's coming up, and eventually someone's gonna discover it. He has a bunch of propane tanks there, so they're gonna like, his idea is, oh, look at that, we stopped a meth lab and we found more propane, look at how great I am. But in that whole thing, a bunch of other people are killed because they're in a meth lab. There's lots of explosive things there. A device goes off and huge explosion goes off. It's a toxic firestorm, basically. Get all these chemicals released in the air, and it's like a huge explosion. And there's nowhere for all this like now toxic air to go. So people are not only being burned alive if they were close enough to it, but they're being suffocated by all this toxic air, the heat. Lots of people are without power at this point, fresh water. Of the thousands of people that used to live in this town. At this point now, there's just about 300 people who are alive. They do, like, almost all of them die. I think it said roughly 24 people end up being alive at the end of this. So the rest of the survivors are people who were involved with the Geiger counter. That's where this comes back into it. They do find the Geiger counter. They find where the source of the dome is. It's this old, like, farm, and the people who end up surviving only survive because they're up high enough in elevation, but also because Cox is now on the outside of the dome with these huge, massive fans blowing fresh air in. But the way that the dome works, it says something like the air power that the fans were giving should have knocked them off their feet, but they barely felt the air come through, so it blocked most of that. That's sort of how they managed to survive. The device that was creating it is like this little box. When they touch it, it kind of takes them into this, like, other world inside their head kind of thing. So they, like, see stuff that's not really there, look back at past memories. Julia, the reporter, she makes contact with what the people of town are calling the Leatherheads. I totally skipped over that. I'll get back to that, I guess. But she managed to talk them into releasing them, and by showing them that the people in the town are real beings with real feelings and they have these little lives. So by getting the creatures to show pity on them, Julie gets them to survive. And then the dome slowly rises and vanishes, and then the, like, 20 people that are left are saved. So yeah, that was my really rough summary.
There was just a lot that went into that book.
So much.
Do you want to give us your thoughts first, since it was your suggestion, or do you want to take a break from talking for a little bit?
I will take a break, but so the Leatherheads, I missed, like, a whole bunch because there's so much going on. Kids start having, like, hallucinations of other beings out there, and they're all starting to have the same kind of, like, same type of visions. They see the same type of things, hear the same things. The creatures that they all kind of hear, that they call those the Leatherheads. That's where I missed that, was the kids are all having these hallucinations. I think 4 people end up killing themselves, if I'm counting correctly.
I mean, same though, honestly.
There's, like, a ton of murders that happen, some on purpose, some others not on purpose. A girl towards kind of the middle beginning-ish gets raped, and she's later in the hospital. A couple of the people that did it to her are also in the hospital for something else, and she steals a gun and she murders them, and then she kills herself. Before I let anyone else talk, I just want to say I really liked the way it was all woven together. It was a lot of stuff, but I think it was done really well. That is my really long-winded spiel. I'll let someone else talk for a minute.
Let me start off by saying that I did really like this book, but I gave it a 75 or 77 out of 100 because the things I liked about this book were wonderful, but there's a couple things I also didn't care for. Overall, I would recommend this book if you have, like, a week to spend reading a 1,000-page book. So my first impressions were that this book does use a lot of words and descriptions to explain just very few plot points, which is part of the 1,200 pages. But because of this, the plot feels like a smooth, natural progression. It feels like somebody plucked me from my house and put me under the dome in Chester's Mill, and I am there witnessing all, like, 20 or so focal point characters go about their day. And I thought that was really awesome. That's part of why I like Stephen King. It's just because when he decides that he wants the reader to feel like they're part of something, he will make the reader feel like they're part of something. The characters are what makes this book shine. Although most can be placed in either the good or bad category, there's a lot of nuance there, and it's very easy to see the decisions that led to the people being good or bad. So I like that. The theme throughout the book is to be wary of those who lust for power, as they will quite literally burn everything to rule over the ashes, as we see with the character of Big Jim, who I thought was done pretty well. The aim of this book was to explore the perspective of the ant under the magnifying glass, but humans are the ants and alien children are the wielders of the magnifying glass in this case. I also thought it was an interesting point to bring up during this book that the aliens didn't think that humans were real. When Julia was literally begging for their lives, they're like, no, I don't believe you. You're not real. That's not happening. And she has to like use her memories and unintentionally that of Barbie to explain that they have their little lives, even though they're quote unquote lesser life forms than the Leatherheads. I would also like to point out that Stephen King does have a lot of pretty good witty one-liners. My favorite from the book being a quote about Joe Scarecrow. The quote is, but he was also a firm believer in the idea that if you were seeing a lot of horse shit, there had to be a pony in the vicinity. And quite frankly, that's a mood. I'll put that on a t-shirt and I'll wear it. Hell yeah. I like the way that Stephen King creates his worlds and his characters. This book hits the nail on the head as it was over 1,000 pages of twisting plot lines and threads that all braided neatly into the same somewhat lackluster ending, I will say. The tension due to the character versus character and character versus town people was present throughout the entire book. I found myself flying through the entire book up until the last like 10 pages because I personally had some not very great thoughts about the ending. I did think it was lackluster. I thought that the aliens were never really explained or explored, and there wasn't really a good reason behind their actions, which is probably what would happen like in real life, as I think this book isn't sci-fi, it's more speculative fiction because the aliens aren't ever explored. But the only reason given for why the lives of 890 people ended was because alien children were bored, and we don't get a good reason behind why that was. We don't get a good reason of like who they are, what they stand in, nothing like that. I kind of thought it was a cop-out. Personally, I was like, well, okay, great. Like,
So you don't think it's intentional?
I do think it was intentional on behalf of Stephen King, because really, if this situation were to happen today, suddenly we find out aliens are a thing, that would be insane. Like we kind of know they are based on like the stuff that's been declassified and like the Tic Tac and what the government thinks. But also, like, if suddenly a dome was dropped over a small town in Maine, like, this is exactly how the public would find out about it. We would have no information, no explanation for why they decided to do this. So I do think it was an intentional choice on the part of Stephen King, one that makes sense with what real life would show. However, this isn't real life. This is a work of fiction, and to go through 1,200 pages of these twisting, intricate plot lines that were also fascinating and all these really well-built characters just to have this be the ending, I almost threw the book. If it wasn't your personal copy of Under the Dome, Jackie, I probably would have burned it. That being said, I do love this book. For the reasons that it's great, I would recommend it. But the last like 5 pages, I was like, you have got to be fucking kidding me, right? Like, this is it? This is what we're talking about right now? Okay, all right, sure. But I do think it was intentional. I do not like the fact that Julia and Barbie have to be humbled to the point where they literally have to go beg for their lives. But I mean, I guess that adds to their character arc, because we see like Julia is constantly kind of cocky as an investigative journalist, or just a journalist in general. She's always in the middle of things. She's always saying like, no, the townspeople have the right to know everything. So she's kind of got this cocky attitude, I think, because she has to. And so to have to humble herself again and like bring up the raw wounds and do that. Same with Barbie, who, as we find out in Iraq, was making Iraqi prisoners feel very much not great. He was responsible for murdering some of them from information, things like that. It was interesting to see them get humbled, but I think that it did kind of feel a little abrupt. Like, she's just like, the last 5 pages, she's like, I have a great idea. We have no oxygen. I'm gonna go beg for our lives. Why wasn't that a thought beforehand? Because I think as soon as I touched that device and I saw there were aliens, I would have been like, look, guys, please, I don't want to die here. Lift the dome. Like, I would have been begging like day one. I wouldn't have been waiting until there was a fire to take everybody else out. That's all I'm saying. Maybe I'm just not a strong person, because like if the apocalypse happens, I'm laying down. But I just, day one, I would have been like, please, I'm done. Lift
You're
this
just going
thing.
back to bed.
Yeah. I was just like, oh, is that a
You get
nuke?
the news, you roll over.
Night.
Guess I don't have to go to work today.
Yeah. Suddenly, bills aren't my problem anymore. Who needs a degree? Not me. I'm majoring in English, not in survival, so good night. Yeah, thank you, Jackie, for bringing someone into this world I have to live for now in case of apocalypse. I can't just lay down. I gotta freaking protect a baby who's worth it.
She would lead us all through the apocalypse. She's got
She-
that tooth, man.
Oh my God, as a 2-year-old, she'd just be like, I don't have time for you today, zombies.
She walks around with her shoulders back, belly out, sippy cup in hand. She's like, follow me. All right.
Excuse me, you cut off the power and I need my cocoa melon. Anyway, all of this is to say, I felt the ending clash with the rest of the novel. I did think that I loved Big Jim's character. Not like I thought he was great, but like he's such a good villain. Because I think that being a big fish in a little pond is a lot of the way that people try to take power. And once people get power, we see in every government, we see in every business, I would argue, being somebody that's worked in this soulless landscape of corporate America, there are definitely people that once they get power refuse to relinquish it. Because I think that there's like an innate evolutionary need that a lot of people have for power, because having power means you can't get kicked out of the tribe. And that's a good way to survive. So I really liked the way that Big Jim was done. I liked the way that Junior was done. I think that him having the tumor that was making him eventually be delusional, but making him have these like violent outbursts was great. I do like Barbie's character, although we have seen it time and time again in Stephen King. I read The Institute recently, and it's the same thing. Ex-military person, a veteran, down on his luck, roaming everywhere, not wanting to put down roots. But I mean, I think everybody loves a pretty good underdog story. And so I fell in love with Julia's character, Barbie's character. I especially loved Rusty's character. And when I talk about the TV show that I tried to watch, when we all give our thoughts, I have quite a few choice words for the writers about Rusty's character.
Okay, save
Yeah,
that
I'm going to
till
save that
after.
because right now we're talking about the book and not what Paramount
Yeah.
Plus did to my boy. So anyway, ending wasn't satisfying. I love all the characters. I did want to point out just a final just a final like parting note. The reason I scored this so high despite hating the ending and like the main plot point was that the character to character conflicts and relationships, there were so many of them described, so many that went into detail, that I legitimately did feel like I was under the dome. From Barbie trying to leave town because the town bullies, who were just like fresh into their 20s, kicked his ass in the parking lot because one of the waitresses was getting a little too flirty. From
Well, he left because the chief of police was like, look,
this ain't for you, bud.
he's like, this guy is the son of a pretty powerful man in town who's going to make life hard for you. You should leave. He's like, I can't protect you from that.
Yeah. And like that's the thing, like one of the most stand-up people in this town dies 2 chapters in. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah,
Because
it would
this-
have turned out a lot differently if Howard
Yeah.
had stuck around a bit longer, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm very sad we didn't get to know his character more, but just like all of that intricacy though, like there's so many details character to character wise. And that's why it felt like I was in a small town, because I really genuinely feel like at the end of this 1,200 pages, I got to know like the main 15 to 20 characters so well. Like I was seeing them in the restaurant, like I was interacting with them like I'd be in a small town. I think the book was the right length, even though it was so long, because I think if Stephen King would have sat down and said, this is way too long, I'm going to cut out on all of this, I wouldn't have thought this was such a good book, because the characters are what really, really, really make this shine, even though the Leatherheads is fucking stupid. I said what I said.
Well, it's Stephen King, so he has to add a little sprinkle, as he does.
Oh, yeah. That is why I said in the beginning that I don't think this is a sci-fi book, because sci-fi implies like heavy world building, heavy future technologies, heavy alien play, things like that. This is more speculative fiction, because what speculative fiction is it's everyday life with just something different added. So this is everyday life with a sprinkle of aliens on the top. So I wouldn't place this in sci-fi personally. And that is what I think. Thank you for coming to my, well, not TED Talk, but my podcast.
I am going to focus my thoughts. I definitely had a lot more thoughts towards the first half of the book, because that was the half that was most interesting to me. The ending, it was a cool ending. I thought the twist was fun, but it was just pretty much a culmination of the rest of this effect. Okay, an ending is already a culmination, but the first half of the story just sets everything up so perfectly that you could kind of see where the ending, like people wise, was going. And then he threw the aliens in as a surprise fun twist. So you get halfway through the book and you know that the big Jim Renee is going to be trouble for Barbie, and they're going to like make his life miserable. And so the fact that he gets thrown in prison is not really a surprise when it comes around. Everybody warns like Barbie the entire book, like, watch out for this guy. He's got it out for you. He's going to make life hard for you. And so by the time it actually happens, you're like, all right, we get it. But I think the most interesting part of this book for me, just like reading it, was the fact that he was prior military and the military was so involved. I've been in the military for 10 years now, so I think reading what he thought would happen with the military was very interesting, but I don't really think it was wrong. Do I think the military would immediately get involved the way they were in the story? Absolutely. Because that's going to happen. If something like that happens, the military is going to be like the first one showing up, and there's probably going to be a full perimeter around every square inch of that thing that they can get around. I found it interesting the way Barbie, the main character, interacted with the head military leader. He calls for this colonel specifically because it was the man that he served under. So he knew him. He asked somebody to call him specifically and was like, tell him Dale Barbara is here and to call me back. And he does. And suddenly this colonel is in charge of this entire operation, which is extremely unlikely, but you can put aside your doubts for the sake of this story. You're like, okay, wow, what a small world. Coincidence. Okay, moving on. But then you go from the fact that he calls them, and then when he goes out to meet the military that's just outside the dome for the first time, all of the military members outside the dome turn their backs on the two people inside the dome. And it's never really explained why in the book. You know, the characters are questioning and they're like, wow, brave Marines will even turn around and look at the citizens of the country they're defending. And the Marines are like, don't make this harder than it has to be. You know why we're doing this. And I'm reading this and I'm like, I don't get it. The only thing I could think of was maybe they don't want to get to know the people because they don't want to get attached because they think they're going to die. I don't know if you guys had any thoughts, but that was the only thing I could come up with. I was like, I don't really get it.
It was definitely weird. My feelings, I'm sorry for jumping in here if that's not what you wanted, but my feelings about that situation were that it was to make it less personal because it was such a big thing that these people were suddenly like victims of a terrorist attack or whatever it was. So I think that in order to make it less
So in
personal,
case they died or were infected with something, they didn't want
yeah,
to like see their faces. I
it
don't know.
was
That's
it
weird to me.
was yeah, I think like I said, my reading was it was so that like when they did things like launch the nuke at the dome, the soldiers weren't like, holy shit, those are people. I don't think we should do this. Anyway, that was just my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess that could, if you don't know too much about the military, I guess that makes sense. But those soldiers definitely aren't the people pushing that button or making that decision. So I was reading it and I was like, I just don't get it. But the way that Barbara goes from asking for this Colonel Cox's help, and then as soon as he gets that first phone call from the military, he immediately has his backup. Like, you're not in it to actually help us. And he doesn't want the promotion. And he understands like the town's almost political scope with the power that this big Renee guy has pretty well. And you can tell that the military people don't understand. So he tries to explain it to them. But this Colonel Cox guy is like adamant. He's like, this is going to happen anyway. And so Barbara is also kind of has this tension against the military the entire time anyway. So I found that to be interesting because he was the one that asked for that guy's help specifically. And then as soon as that guy helps, he's like, fuck you. That's pretty much it for me. I think we talked about all of my other points here. I liked the ending. I've read a lot of Stephen King. I have a little Stephen King collection going. This is the first time I've read Under the Dome. I actually was exposed to a little bit of it when I was younger. My dad listens to audiobooks and I eavesdropped on a large portion of it. So I thought it was alien throughout the story. So I kind of had the ending spoiled to me a little bit. And I like Stephen King's Alien books, but I feel like it was, once you read a couple of his books, don't kill me, Stephen King. I'm sorry, I still love you. The alien part almost gets to be like a little repetitive. I'm sure other people have different opinions on that or not, but that's why I'd been avoiding it so long. I was like, it's a cool concept, but I know it's aliens, and why read this whole book for that? And then I read this whole book, and I did like the story about the townspeople and stuff and the way they interacted. I think it's worth reading just for that. But in the end, it was, aliens did it. So it's, I don't know.
I hope you guys can see my text chats. Thank you.
I absolutely can. Izzy
Yes.
is yelling at me in the chat. All caps. I'm getting all caps right now, guys.
I just think it's funny how you cheated and knew the ending. That's all.
Not on purpose. Blame dad.
I'm going to call him and tell him some strong words he should have known
Yeah, how
20
dumb.
years
How
ago.
dare you listen to Stephen King? Yeah.
We were going to talk about this book on a podcast, and he should have saved like 8-year-old Jackie from spoilers.
Jackie, what did you score the book?
75.
A 75. Okay.
I did like the book. I would definitely recommend it, but the ending is aliens. So I scored it pretty low.
So I also scored it a 75. Like I said earlier, I don't know necessarily if I would have labeled it either science fiction or horror. It was, I don't know, maybe a little more like suspense, but I think the horror part of it comes from, it makes you feel like maybe this could happen to you. I think that was the horror part of it. If, like, a little bit like Izzy said, I felt like I was with these people. I was experienced all this with them. So having to think about what would I do if this happened to me? That was the horror part of it. I would absolutely just vibe in my house and read my books and just let death take me when it wants to, because like I have no skills that will save me in this scenario at all.
What if your job had called you while you were under the dome and was like, oh, by the way, we need you to come in?
Yeah.
And also it's a double because Susan's caught in fucking
Susan's a
on the other
zombie
side.
now. She can't help with marketing anymore, so you're gonna have to step up.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, considering I work for a theater and I answer their phones, I highly doubt people are gonna be like, "Are you still having shows? Like I know that we're not supposed to run electricity, but like, can you guys run electricity?" I feel
Have
like
you met the general public?
that's fair. I feel like my job would be like, "Please do not come in," and I'd be like, "Okay, cool."
Alternatively, they could be like, this is our chance to put on the most realistic zombie play we can. Yeah,
You
in
know,
here.
You'd be a zombie catcher.
That's true. Actually, that might happen. We kind of talked about one of the things I wanted to talk about, like the ending and stuff. I liked it, but not for this book. I feel like it should have gone more into the aliens. If we were going to talk about aliens, we should have got aliens. If they had just said, we don't know why this happened, we don't know where it came from, and then all of a sudden it just disappears the same way it shows up, that would have been a little different, I think. Because sometimes
That
you
would have
just,
been honestly a much better ending.
yeah, because then like sometimes you don't always get the answer to why something happens. It just happens. So if they just like one day the dome disappears, all these people are dead, and they now have to deal with the aftermath, then like, okay, cool. But if you can give me aliens, give me aliens, you know? The other thing, just because I want to see what you guys think, Horace, the dog, remember when it's like sniffing around the popcorn and stuff and it hears the dead voices?
Yes, why did we talk about that more?
Yeah, but it gets bring up for like 2 pages and then never brought up again. Like,
You telling me dogs can talk to the dead? And that wasn't the plot? That was just a side paragraph?
It's Stephen King, so it wouldn't surprise me if that was a callback to a previous novel or something.
That's actually the Leatherheads talking to the dog.
oh, the dog, they're just like,
The dog's a leatherhead. Holy shit.
my
Everybody don't
God.
trust your corgis anymore.
we solved the problem. but like
That's why they're so cute. They're aliens.
I knew it.
there
Nobody
was
with butts that good can be natural on this planet.
I'm very upset that many of the dogs died. Could have done without that. Rusty's dog, though,
Audrey.
Audrey. Yeah.
The best girl.
And
Oh my God, the best girl.
I loved that the dog, like, they were like, yeah, she just keeps doing this weird whiny thing. And they're like, the dog's like, no, I'm trying to save your babies. Like, they're doing weird crap.
Make them stop. I don't
Yeah.
like it.
But that was the other thing. I just wanted to make sure we brought up Horace and the dead voices. Because like we didn't get enough of that. Speaking of dogs, you can probably hear mine
Yeah.
barking.
Speaking of dogs, hello, Lily.
Izzy brought up one of my favorite quotes, but this other one just kind of made me laugh. She can't help it, he said. She's got the soul of a poet and the emotional makeup of a junkyard dog. Like, I read that, I was like, that's amazing, and wrote that down.
That's actually a perfect description for Lily.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And then murder is like potato chips. You can't stop with just one. And he's just like, the fact that he just like writes stuff like this so nonchalantly, you're like, sir, are you okay? Should we be worried? I had one more quote though that I liked just for the way it was written, I think. Sorrow for a wrong was better than nothing, but no amount of after the fact sorrow could ever atone for the joy taken in destruction. And I just really like that. That was another one of those. I was at work and I got to that part and I had to like hurry up and want to get a sticky note so I could write that down and so I wouldn't forget to write it in my actual reading journal later. I like Stephen King has always been a favorite of mine. I haven't obviously it's the first time I've read this book, but just sometimes he just has these little nuggets of profound wisdom underlying all this like scary murder stuff.
You know, this isn't really relevant, but I'm going to say it anyway. I was watching this video the other day, and it was like today's bullies versus 1950s Stephen King bullies. And today's bullies was like, yeah, I'm going to go on the internet and I'm going to call them names. And the 1950s Stephen King bullies like, yeah, I'm going to tie his dog up with a chain and kill it. And then I'm going to carve slurs into his skin with a screwdriver. And today's bullies like, excuse me?
Yeah.
It's like, I was just gonna, do a little hazing. Like,
I'm just
give
a
him
bully,
a what
bro.
for, like, medium burn. Like, don't kill his whole family, Jesus. Like,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make his life kind of inconvenient. I didn't want to scar him forever.
That's a really good point though. So I think I don't have it pulled up, but where does this now leave our new ranking for this book?
So this book, because of the issues that we had, we all kind of ranked it at a 77, 75. So this is currently book 3 out of 3. But I will say that I'd rather reread this one than Circe.
Yes. Even with how
yes.
long it was, I would still rather reread this.
Even with how
Yes.
long it was, even with the ending that sucked balls, I would still
I would
reread
reread
this
the
one.
first half for sure.
Yeah,
And then
I'll
probably
just like
get bored like 3/4 of the way through and read something else. But
I think it's been a really long time though since I've read a book that made me like actually audibly gasp.
yes.
And there was a lot of times where I just like, what? Like just all the unexpected murder and
Big Jim as a person.
yes, okay. That was something I was going to touch on. I'm glad you brought it up though. I didn't love Big Jim, but I loved Big Jim. Like
He's such like the quintessential like almost normal villain, like the scary type of villain, because this is a villain
yes.
you can actually see.
Yeah.
Oh, as
He's
long as nothing goes wrong, he's just kind of a bully.
yes, exactly. And like he's the scariest type of villain because he's realistic. Like he doesn't need supernatural powers or anything to have all that power and destroy so many people's lives and
Don't worry, Sam, it's for the good of the town.
yeah. Oh, and all the religious aspects of it,
Yes.
like the way that religion was used in this. I'm not religious by any means, but having just like this scary underlying to me of people in power using religion to get what they want and then just, oh, but it's okay because I'm a religious person.
I would
That
steer you wrong. I'm a deacon at your church.
exactly. Yeah.
Have
Like
you
that.
guys ever watched the Book of Eli?
Yes.
No.
It's good.
So it's really good. You have to watch it. But basically, all the Bibles have been it's post-apocalyptic, and all the Bibles and any book of any kind is gone. So this
Oh.
evil guy is desperately searching for a Bible for the express purpose of he knows that the Bible can control the masses. So he thinks if he gets control of a Bible, he can like control the flow of information from that and use that to build his own power base. So it's really interesting the way that the religion side of it is brought up in this book, almost as if kind of the way you think of the evil villain in the Book of Eli would have been using religion to fuel his own gain the same way.
And that's something I also thought was interesting is that the pastor that was so religious, he was into self-flagellation in order to atone for his sins, is the one that is helping launder money for a meth lab knowingly. And I thought that was an interesting thing to do because you have someone so obsessed with religion that they've been so caught up with, well, this is what's going to help my followers. This is going to help the flock. We're going to have money to have this radio tower that's going to be able to broadcast for miles because it was super expensive, and that's the meth money's paying for this, but it's not my congregation who's impacted by the meth that we're making. It's other people, other heathens. So I just thought that was a really, really good way of doing that. I think you're absolutely right, Sam. Like, this is just very realistic, and that's what makes it good.
Yeah, it has all these elements of like, yes, there's aliens. In theory, that's not realistic. I believe in aliens, so that could still be real. But all the like smaller quote unquote villains, Big Jim using religion, the meth lab, and then when all these teenagers become policemen, like some of them are allowed to carry guns. So now all of these kids who don't have that like mental capacity yet are now in charge and carrying firearms. So there's that extra scary
The
bit.
kids who are friends with Junior, who's a murderer, who are
Yep.
also their town's bullies, and beat Barbie up in a bar's parking lot because the waitress that was dating one of them hit on Barbie. Yeah.
That's not why. The waitress told that
Yeah,
group
yeah.
of friends that
That
he
he
had
raped her.
sexually
Yep.
assaulted her,
I forgot about that part because
which is
that's
almost
not
noble of them, honestly.
almost.
I wish I would have, if I was in that situation, I'd want a vigilante group to go kick the shit out of whoever. Like,
But that's the nuance I'm talking about. Like, you can see why in their heads that makes sense. You could see why if that was what happened, that would be like a noble thing to do. But you can also see from what actually happened that it was wrong and it made them the bad guys. Sorry, Sam. I know we're talking about your thoughts right now. I'm just geeking out with you.
No, I agree with you. I think you phrased it in a really good way that you can see why everyone did what they did and how they reached that point. And I think all of these characters were written in such a way that at any given point, I don't necessarily know that I wouldn't have done the exact same thing. You see all of Junior's bad stuff happening and then find out he has a brain tumor. So you're like going through this book like, wow, Junior's like a piece of crap. But then you see that and you're like, oh, okay, maybe all of that stuff wasn't his fault, you know? So it's like all of these characters are just like so rounded out and so fleshed out that then, like you said too, that if this book was any shorter, I don't think it would have been as successful. I do really, really like this book. I only gave it a 75 because of the ending. That was like
Yes.
my main gripe.
Yeah, so now that we've given our thoughts, I signed up for a Paramount Plus subscription for a month just because they had the TV show they made in like 2008 on there. And I was like, wow, I really enjoyed the book. I know that TV shows don't always get it right, but I'm going to just give it a chance just to see if like maybe it's just some little stuff, if overall things are okay. No. Okay. So the opening scene is Dale Barbara burying a body. Yes, please give me your thoughts on what you think is happening.
Excuse me, what?
Yes. Yep.
What?
Mm-hmm. Burying a body. That's
What?
the opening shot. And I was like, how could you have massacred my boy already? Not even a minute into this TV show. And so Ryan and I were watching it, and I was like, I wonder who that character is. And Ryan's like, I think they said his name was Barbie. And I'm like, no. And then we go from there to Junior and Angie having sex and him saying that he loves her and that he's loved her since he was little, and her going, well, you're going off to college, so like we should probably nip this in the bud. And I was like, oh, that's really far from what is happening when the dome comes down in the book. Okay. So apparently Angie is a character for 2 whole seasons, but I only watched 5 minutes. So I was like, I'm good. So then we go to the casting though. Excellent if they would have stuck to the script or to the book. But then like she rejects him and he like grabs her arm and she slaps him. And so he like lets her go. And then it cuts to him a little later with like crazy eyes, just opening a knife, like a pocket knife back and forth. And I was like, you are getting rid of all of the nuance to his character right here. Like, what are you doing? He seemed like a normal dude that had anger issues until you find out what's happening with him. Why would you make this choice? So then that happens, and I'm like, whatever. And then we cut to the radio station where a very put together and stylish man named Phil Bushy is running the radio station as a DJ and speaking on air. And his assistant pops in to talk to him, Dodie Sanders. Guess who's not a character in this? Dan Bushy. Little Walter. Not
What?
yes. So Phil is put together, not addicted to meth, having a great time being the host of the radio station and its actual DJ. And his assistant is Dodie. Yes.
What? Okay. I don't even I don't know how to process that.
And that is not even my biggest grievance. So what are your thoughts at this point, Jackie? What are you feeling?
I don't think that's even the same story.
No.
How do you like, unless this is from like years in the past?
Nope.
And they're like,
this is the day the dome went down.
A huge time skip?
Nope. This is all happening when the dome is being put in place. So all of that happens. And then my biggest thing, because you guys know how much I love Rusty, right? You know how much of a Rusty fan I am. So we see Lyndon and Duke Perkins in the car on the way to the dome, passing Barbie in his speedy little car, trying to get the fuck out of town. We see Linda's boyfriend, Linda Escobar, her boyfriend, Rusty, a fireman, is heading out of town to go on a call. And then when the dome comes down, they touch hands on either side of the dome because Rusty's on the other fucking side. Yeah. And then Miss Shumway, Julia Shumway, is actually a Mrs. because she's married to a man that works at the hospital. I watched 5 minutes of the TV show. And after this part, I turned that shit right off. I was like, this ain't for me, fam. Look at how they massacred my boy.
This feels like if they took like, I don't know, characters from like Sesame Street and put them in, I don't know, the plot of like Hocus Pocus or something. Like,
I would watch that.
Like it's all the same characters, but they don't fit in anything, and it's like they have the same name, but that's it. Like,
not even like how what did you do? You had such a good plot, beautiful character developments, character arcs already in there, a shit ton of plot lines. You could have made a TV show for seasons. And y'all went, and this was in 2008, so they don't give a flying fuck about my opinion in 2024. But y'all went and just massacred everybody I cared about. Why? I don't understand. But anyway, so I would highly recommend reading the book. I would recommend, honestly, not even subscribing to Paramount Plus for allowing this garbage on their platform. They also have The Stand on there, which is another one of my favorite, one of my favorite Stephen King books. And I didn't even touch that shit. I was like, I ain't watching this. I can't.
No,
My heart can't take it.
I actually watched the first episode of The Stand not too long ago, and I also never got past the
Damn
first
it.
like 20
God
minutes of it. Like,
damn it. It's that threat, like they're gonna take your favorite book and make it into a movie. Yep. They sure did, and they murdered it. Okay. Anyway, that's my
but
thoughts and
Stephen King
feelings.
books, like, you don't need.
There's a reason why Stephen King is like one of the most published authors. There's a reason why literally he can just give us a book of scraps and we'll be like, thank you. Thank you,
Please, sir,
Father.
can I have another?
You've murdered the characters halfway through and you're gonna make me cry. Thank you. Thank you for this blessing. And you take that and you just like shit on it and then you put it on TV. And I just can't do it.
I wish that these screenplays or whatever had to be approved by the author. Like the actual scripts had to be approved
I
by the
wish
author before they could play it.
that if the author didn't approve, he could punch the writer in the face and film it. I would watch that.
That actually
That-
needs to be a reality TV show.
Stephen King punches every writer that's done him wrong right in the face. And they don't get to hit back. In fact, all of the angry fans get to tie their arms up. I'm sorry. This might be too much, but I have very strong feelings on the matter. So yeah, that was our review of Stephen King's Under the Dome.
In case you forgot why we were here.
Rereadability is better than Cersei, but ultimately this was ranked the number 3 spot overall just because of the ending. Next week, we're going to be reading The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I still am going to go with that pronunciation.
It sounded
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Yeah. That
I
sounded
was-
very natural.
I was winging it. So episode 4. We just started a Facebook page. Jackie, if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's on Facebook. If you search for our podcast name, it should pop right up. And follow it. You're welcome to comment on any post I make. I am going to every month put a list of the books we're reading so you guys can start reading a little bit ahead just in case you don't have like as much time. That way you're not constantly scrambling
Like us.
sometimes.
I do want to just make sure we mention it. Penny Dreadfuls, a book review podcast. That's what our Facebook is.
Yes.
So yeah, we also have a Goodreads page under our podcast name. You can follow us on YouTube, like and subscribe, leave us a comment, send us an email to pennydreadfulspodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you to give us book suggestions or just let us know what you think. And yeah, Jackie, you can go ahead and stop that recording.